Okay, hello everyone. Welcome back. Nice to see you again. Uh, okay, let's start with our meditation as usual. So go ahead and set up your posture. And as usual in these 5 minutes, be sure you refresh your motivation for participating. And then spend some time just settling your mind, centering, going inward. Okay, welcome back, everyone. Let's, as usual, we'll start with some review from yesterday. So let's take a look at the screen. We're still on the small scope, so we are working on the 4 thoughts that turn the mind. Those thoughts that when we meditate on them, when we contemplate them, when we integrate them into our view of our lives, we start to see that it makes a lot of sense to use our precious lives uh, well and do it now. And that turning the mind toward virtue, turning the mind toward working with the mind to start to change those negative habits is actually the way in which we can clear away our suffering both now and for future lives. So the point that we talked about yesterday was the preciousness of this human life that we have. So the first few points that we went over are the fact that we have a human body and a human mind, which is so precious, this intelligence that we are able to learn and understand, and that we have this system that teaches us how to make our minds more flexible, how to work with our minds so that we can start to change those negative habits of mind that create suffering, that we live in a place, or we have, or these teachings exist in a place where there is religious freedom. Even if we aren't in a Buddhist country, we still have the opportunity to study and learn a tradition that is not necessarily the tradition that our country embraces or that is the majority within our country. Then we have interest in spiritual practice, which is not true for every human being. Some human beings are, not interested, but we have this, this questioning attitude that we're trying to find meaning in our life. That we are not alone in our spiritual practice. We have a community of like-minded people. And here we have, 84 people right now this morning, or my morning, who are talking about, thinking about studying the Dharma. So you're not alone, you're not isolated. And then the community becomes a support. It becomes a support for your practice in the sense that you have someone that you can talk to, you have someone that you can practice with. Right now we're doing it online, but of course, when this virus situation, I had one friend call it our coronavirus or COVID-19 retreat. So we can reframe it, and see this time that we have to be on our own, the social distancing that we're having to do, we can see it as actually an opportunity to practice retreat. So when this is done, then we can start to reconnect physically, even with others in our community. And I have actually found that because there are more and more online activities, that more and more people who couldn't travel physically to a place where Buddhism has been taught are actually participating online. So I've seen people from other my other sanghas, like my college where I learned about Buddhism. I've reconnected with people there. So it's actually, for me, it's been like more social than usual. So another aspect of this precious human life is that we have the material conditions to practice. We have we have freedom, enough freedom from suffering, in that we are not constantly in pain or constantly worn out or overwhelmed with depression, or anger, or hopelessness, that we can actually consider that there is a different way in which we could exist, a different way that we could think, because not everybody has that. Some people are so stuck in their habits of mind that they can't even imagine that there could be a different way. And then we have access to qualified spiritual teachers, so people are continuing to be trained. We still, we have newer lamas. A lot of the lamas that came from Tibet have aged, into out of existence, but they have trained, and there are reincarnations, and there are also
other students of these amazing teachers who have been trained to continue to practice and teach the Dharma. So that's very nice. So looking again at renunciation. So this is a quote from Lama Yeshe about renunciation. So this renunciation indicates a deep, heartfelt decision, definitely to emerge from the repeated frustrations and disappointments of ordinary life. Simply stated, renunciation is the feeling of being so completely fed up with our recurring problems that we are finally ready to turn away from our attachments to this and that and begin searching for another way to make our life satisfying and meaningful. So what Lama Yeshe is talking about here is that we are willing, because we see the difficulties in life, because we see that there is a pathway to respond differently to the conditions in our life that turn them not into suffering, but into growing experiences. And then through those growing experiences, we actually start to experience more happiness, and we become more free to practice virtue, to practice our meditation, to develop realizations, so that we can completely get free of this suffering, so that we don't in a next life are reborn in any of those realms that we talked about, that actually we now have the opportunity to choose to come back to continue to benefit sentient beings in a way that in which is actually most beneficial to them. So it's this decision that we're not going to continue to seek happiness over and over again in things that are disappointing, right? In things that the happiness doesn't last. And we're going to see that doing negative actions to get some short-term result, or what we think, is happiness, that this is the only way, we start to turn away from those and see that no, actually, creating and experiencing happiness in our lives is about benefiting others and creating virtue in the world, not doing negative things. So if you believe that somehow you have to lie, in your business in order to make money, then you're mistaken, because in fact, all lying does is create people who don't trust you and makes you lie more and more. And it doesn't, the only reason that your business is successful is because you were generous in the past. Because it's so seeing this cause and effect the way it really is, instead of on this sort of short term and like narrow view, that sees cause and effect only in the immediate instead of in the long term. Okay, so then yesterday we talked about ran over some of the types of meditation. So we talked a bit about calm abiding yesterday, some of the ways in which we recognize that we are making progress in calm abiding. In particular, having a more calm, overall sort of a calm approach to our lives is the result of practicing calm abiding on the cushion. So it's single-pointed focus. And in the sense that what we're trying to do is we're training our minds to stay present with one thing. And what that does is that creates flexibility, in the sense that now we can choose what we're going to attend to. We can choose where we're going to place our minds. And then as a result, we also have more awareness of where our minds are. So often our normal, default mode network is this constant jumping from thing to thing, whether it's external, attractions, or if it's internal mental things that are arising. So by practicing this single pointed focus, by getting this relaxation, this clarity, this turning inward, this introspection, we're actually better able to work with our minds, which influence our behavior, which influence our emotions, which influence then our relationships with people, which influence how we interact and react in the world, and how we solve problems. So it becomes really the basis and the root of working with our lives and starting to change our lives is this ability to look inward and become aware of what is arising, and then decide, where do we want our minds to go, instead of our habits that take us in, ways that have created suffering in the past. And then this analytic, we take this calm abiding, this ability to focus, we put it on our analysis of certain topics. We, in general, traditionally, we're talking about the topics related to spiritual growth, like precious human rebirth, like death and impermanence, like karma, like purification, like, all these things that we talked about in the last class. Impermanence, emptiness, those types of things. And so that starts to shift our view of reality. We start to see things differently. And with that calm abiding, it just supports it to start to make actual changes in our habitual way of thinking. So the more that I contemplate on the benefits of having a warm heart toward others. So if loving others with no strings attached, wanting to help them, having compassion when they're suffering, wanting to remove their suffering, the more that I meditate on that and analyze why that's such a good idea and generate that feeling in my heart on the cushion, then the more that is going to express itself in the world. Okay. And then as a result, the more that I am kind, considerate, generous, take others' point of view, and patient, the more that I am that way with others, the more friends I have, the more kindness I receive, the more I have happier experiences in my life. And so then when really difficult things come, like the loss of a loved one, or someone betrays us, some friend does something that really hurts us in a big way, our response is not as overwhelmingly emotionally devastating as it would be if we didn't have a view of the world that sees things are always changing. Maybe in the past I wasn't necessarily kind to this person, and now I'm receiving the results, so I'm learning from the situation how to be a better friend, how to be, a better person, right? And so this is how our analysis starts to then change our habits of mind. And then the mindfulness brings us into this present moment. Instead of constantly thinking about the past or planning for the future, it brings us here, and it makes us again, and it supports that calm abiding, where we start to be aware of, what are my habits? How do I usually react? And is this really benefiting me? Is this really an effective way to be in the world? Constantly getting irritated by everything that people do, or, whatever habits you have, constantly mistrusting people, thinking everybody is out to get you, all these habits that we can really develop. Sometimes we develop these habits too when we're very young, because we have some, repeated interactions with people who don't have a lot of skill, whether it's, peers in our culture, whether it's our parents. We learn habitual ways of responding in relationships that now as adults don't necessarily work anymore, but we still continue to perceive the world in the way that we learned to as a child, especially when there are emotions involved, because emotions are very powerful. So if we had a really strong emotional reaction to a repeated situation or to one particular trauma in our life, and we learned to cope with it in a certain way, sometimes that habit perpetuates itself. And so when we have even the slightest trigger of that situation, we respond emotionally instead of being aware that maybe there's a different way, that maybe we could open our hearts, maybe we could think differently about the situation. Okay, so I wanted to go into talking about when we're in meditation, we sometimes are really distracted, in particular. Let me change sorry. So there are usually two. I'll come back to this slide. So if you didn't get it, I'm going to talk about it. I'll come back to it. Okay. So there usually, when we sit down in meditation, we have two really strong things that happen with our mind. Okay. One is either that we become really excited, and this tends to be for the majority of people, that they have these constant distractions, whether it's sounds, sights, sensations, or mental things. The mind, just interrupts. It just shows up, and out of our control, we start thinking about something else, right? Whatever comes into our mind. They actually say that 99% of those mental distractions are objects of attachment. And we're going to talk about attachment today. So it's interesting. You have to, as you start to do more of this examination of what exactly is distracting you, you have to, you'll start to see there are themes, whether it's a song that made you feel good, or whether it was some funny thing that happened like on a TV show or in your, with the family, or whether it's a really nice romantic memory. Oftentimes these are the kinds of things that we think of, that did make us feel good, but now we're trying to hold on to that feeling. So this is an example of excitation. So we either go from this really, running kind of distracted mind because it is excited, to completely falling asleep. Okay, just spacing out, no longer, just sort of the object, whether it's the breath or the awareness, just kind of drifts away. And we, even when I'm doing a body scan, sometimes this morning I was doing um, my breathing exercises, with the nose, and then I couldn't even get to the right nostril. I did the left nostril, but I got distracted before I got to the right one. I mean, it was like, whoa, that is really distracted. So that's like, okay, but this falling up, where you just started falling asleep, right? And it's not necessarily completely asleep, but it's just sort of getting dazed. And sometimes that happens when you first wake up, if you meditate and you're still kind of in that half asleep state. So anyway, what do we do, with this excitation? What are some of the things that we can do? Oh, I want to get rid of that. Hold on a second. Hide video panel. Sorry. Hold on a second. Okay. So one thing that we can do is we can loosen our focus. So if we hold our object really tightly, if we are like clamped down on our object, this can actually perpetuate the tendency of the mind to want to rebel like a teenager. When how when teenagers, if you're too strict with them, then they sneak out, right? Well, that's kind of the way the mind works, that the mind wants to, as soon as have imposed this strict will onto it, then it wants to flow, it wants to run away. So loosening the focus and only using part of your mind to focus on the object can actually help with this distraction. Sometimes when our head is too high, we can be distracted by, especially if we meditate with our eyes open, we can be distracted by having the head too high. So lower your chin slightly. You can close your eyes slightly. And if you're really keep getting distracted, like you start planning your next vacation, and you're really, want to get this, the flights and, all that kind of stuff. Or if you're really have, you keep thinking about work and you're not even at work, but you're, solving all your job problems. What you can do is think of a serious topic, in the sense like death as an example, that you don't have much time to work on your mind. You only have these conditions for so long. So then that sort of gets, like wakes you up and says, okay, get serious. You only have this much time in your day to do your meditation. So come back to it. So sometimes thinking of a serious topic. And then another one is that when you find that your mind has been pulled away from the topic, when you have been distracted by something, you can relax. The first thing you can do is relax your body, and then you release the thought, you let go, and then you very kindly and gently return to the object. So Felipe cued you when we did the calm abiding last night, just to relax, release it, and then return to the topic. Now, for the dullness, this spacing out or this falling asleep, what you can do is that now the focus has become too loose. So now you need to tighten up your focus just a little bit, okay? You don't want to do it too much because then you go right back into that distraction. So tighten your focus means that you become more engaged with the object again. You sort of look more closely at your breath, or you of course you find it again, but you look, you try to find exactly when are the gaps, exactly, staying with the whole in breath and the whole out breath. So that's tightening your focus, where you track it more closely, kind of thing, like as if you were watching a bird. And sometimes you can just notice a bird flying by, but if you tighten your focus, you actually follow the bird. Okay. You can open your eyes slightly. Sometimes when we're going into dullness, we start, our shoulders go forward, our head goes down. So you open your eyes slightly. You can lift your chin, raise your sternum. Okay. Another thing you can do if you're really, keep drifting off, is you can imagine a bright light in your mind, or an inspiring topic like Buddha nature or hopefulness, something like this, that, or a warm heart or loving kindness. And then this gets you re-engaged. But actually imagining, just in your mind, this bright light can actually help you wake up. And then if you lose the object because you keep drifting off, you refresh your focus, you refresh your interest in the topic, and then you restore your focus, and then you retain it, you stay with it. And if you really keep falling asleep and you just can't handle it, then you need to take a break. Stand up, splash water on your face, maybe go outside, stretch a little bit, and then you come back and you start again. Okay. And that's in particular, that's for calm abiding. And I really think that the calm abiding is the basis of then doing the analytic meditation, because once you have more focus, once you have more calmness and more ability to direct the mind, then your analytic meditation of staying on the topic and going deeper is much more effective. Okay. It's interesting. Well, you don't need to know that, but I've noticed my posture when I'm teaching goes much down instead of up. Okay, so let's go on. Let's talk about attachment. So we talked about anger in the last course, but I'll review kind of what we talked about a little bit. Anger is the exaggeration of one's view of an object that exaggerates the negative aspects. Okay, so sees only the horrible parts of a situation or a person, and then makes that person or that situation totally intolerable. Like you just can't stay with it. You know, you have to reject it, you have to get away from it. And sometimes we feel like the way to get away from a person who we see as so horrible and so negative is to hurt them. If we hurt them, then they will go away. Or sometimes we feel like that we withdraw and we reject that person and we end up hurting them because we can't tolerate, we can't be in that situation. And sometimes we even hurt ourselves because we feel like we are in such an intolerable situation. So we have difficult experiences. Let's say, someone breaks up with us and it's completely out of our control, and we have this really, this pain, this suffering from having had that relationship end. And now we can't tolerate it. We get so upset about it that we distract, and we start doing things that actually harm our bodies. So we drink, or we harm our financial situation by shopping, or we overeat, or we sleep all the time, which is not necessarily good for the rest of our life when we need to be, taking care of it, maintaining it in some way. So sometimes we get angry at ourselves and start to destroy ourselves. Okay. So this comes from a perception of the situation that sees it in a certain way that exaggerates its negative qualities. So let's take a look at how that perception works. And you saw this in the last course, but I want to go over it again because it also applies to attachment. So let's see if I can do this and annotate. Spotlight. Okay, so this gives me a little better pointer. All right, so you see right here, there's a flower, okay? And then these dots here are the photons that are coming off the flower, okay? And they're coming into the light, into the eye. So these photons are light particles that, so a light like from an electric light or from natural light, particles bounce off what is the material of the flower. And what we see are actually these photons, and then they stimulate the cells in the back of the eye, and then they create certain responses in the nerves, and then also in the brain, in particular back here, which is called the occipital cortex. So this part of the brain is stimulated, and then through that process, it goes into the mind. So this is the mind. That's what that thought bubble is. We create an image of the flower. Okay. Now this image of the flower isn't exactly the same as the flower that is out here, because in order for us to even create an image, even to relate to a mental construct of a flower, we have to bring in other sources like of knowledge, other experiences, and we manipulate that image in certain ways so that we can relate to it. Okay. So one way in which we manipulate it is that we make it permanent. Okay. Meaning unchanging, even though this flower is constantly changing, and the photons reflect that. When we see it in our minds, when we get this image of it, it's actually we see it as permanent. And then we don't realize that we have made it permanent. We think that this image of the flower is accurate to what is out here. So what we're doing is we're actually projecting, that's what this arrow is, we're projecting onto the flower what we created in our minds. And we're saying that what is in my mind is how things actually are out here. Okay, because they appear that way to us, because that's what they look like, because the change that is happening in the flower is so small that we can't detect it. We can't see it. It is reflected in the photons, but even the stimulus, as soon as it gets to the brain, it starts ignoring those parts, right? And it only sees the permanence. It only sees those things that appear to stay the same. Okay. So the other way in which okay, so we forget that this is separate, that what is out here, this flower, is not the exact same thing as this image in here. Okay, so what else happens is when we contact this image, stop doing that. When we contact this image of a flower, sometimes we have a positive feeling from it. So let's say it's beautiful. We see it as beautiful and it makes us feel good. Okay? So because of this ignorance that forgets that things exist separately from our minds, that our minds create this image of what is external, we project onto that flower the good feeling. Okay? And we say that the good feeling is actually inherent in the flower. Okay, so because we forget that, then we can develop attachment, meaning that we want to grasp onto, we want to cling to, we want to get that thing, instead of recognizing that the happiness or the good feeling that arose when we contacted the flower actually arose in our mind, that it is a dependent arising. There is the conditions of the flower, but there is also the response in the mind. Okay, so if the conditions were solely in the flower, and I always needed that flower to be happy, to have any good feeling, I needed all these external things, then now I forgot what I was going to say. Okay, so then I would want to grasp, okay, and get at that flower. That isn't what I wanted to say, but it'll come back to me. Okay, so with attachment, what we do is we exaggerate those positive qualities. We think that that flower is the source of our happiness, and then we do negative things to try to get it. We steal it, or we take it from someone else. And if that flower had the feeling of good, of happiness in it, if it was completely from the side of the flower and had nothing to do with our minds, then it would make everybody happy. Okay, and flowers don't necessarily make everybody happy, right? Sometimes people are allergic to flowers. They don't like flowers. Like we used to have these tiger lilies that we would get in the gompa, and they had these really strong fragrance, and people were allergic to them, and they would say, please don't bring that flower into the gompa, right, the meditation hall. And so for them, they would see that flower and they would not get a positive feeling from it. They would get a negative feeling from it, because the image in their mind is this image of something that makes me allergic, gives me a headache, or makes me sneeze. Okay, so let's look at what attachment does. So attachment, as opposed to anger, now exaggerates the positive aspects, sees only the good things. And of course, this is easier to see when we start talking about relationships and relating to others. That especially when we're first falling in love. And this doesn't mean you shouldn't fall in love. I think it's an amazing experience, and it's very important for developing relationships and bonding, connecting to others and relating to others. But oftentimes when we're first falling in love, we only see the positive aspects and we don't see the negative aspects, okay, of any person. And everybody has both positive and negative. And what happens is that when we start to get to know the person and we see their negative sides, then we reject them. We start looking for another experience of falling in love, instead of seeing that it's going to happen again, because everybody exists in this way. So attachment sees the object or person as a source of lasting happiness, and then grasps or clings to the object or person. So when I'm talking about attachment here, I'm not talking about the bonding that happens like between parents and children. Okay, that's actually a good kind of connection. Okay, we could call that bonding, especially that happens when the babies are newborns and they first starting to recognize the faces of their caregivers, their parents who feed them and care for them. That's actually, develops a real good basis of trust. What I'm talking about more is as adults, when we start to um, develop like an excessive desire for things and then believe that those things are what are going to make us happy, when in fact happiness comes from our minds. Happiness comes um, from making other people happy. It doesn't come from things. Okay, we can have enjoyment. Okay, that's not a problem, but it's recognizing that that enjoyment is temporary. Anything that is the product of causes and conditions is always going to be temporary. So that means the happiness is not going to last. Like the cheesecake or the chocolate cake, the more that you eat it, the less pleasure it brings. Okay. So it doesn't make a lot of sense to be attached to coffee, to chocolate cake as a source of happiness, because it's not going to last. So then we start talking about, well, how do we develop lasting happiness? And what Buddhism says is that, well, you start to see the world the way it really is. One of the other disadvantages of attachment is that it creates a lot of worry and anxiety, because once we have a comfortable feeling, once we, this deep arising happens, this thing comes into our life, a person or an object, we feel good, we feel happy, we start grasping and clinging to the thing, and then we can't let go of it, and we worry about keeping it. We worry about losing it because it's the source of our happiness. And when we lose it, we think we're going to be devastated, and we're going to, lose, it's just, we're going to fall apart if we don't have that person or that thing, because we believe that the source of happiness is in the thing. Okay. So let's look at how do we start to get over when we've developed some kind of attachment for something that is like obsessive desire is sometimes, yeah, it could be a better way to translate it rather than attachment, because attachment has really positive connotations in our culture, in the English language. But if you could use, say, maybe obsessive desire, more what I'm talking about. Okay, so antidotes to attachment are impermanence. So seeing things that are constantly changing, they are not always going to be the source of our happiness. We're going to go through ups and downs. Everything exists in this way. People, situations, everything, objects, okay? So then we learn to let go. We let go a little bit. It's not that we have to break up or, reject our family members because we love them, something like that. It's more about, it's an attitude of just recognizing that if they aren't in my life, if they aren't there, that I'll still be okay, that I can still be happy. I mean, I love having them around. I love, cheesecake, but if I don't have it, it's okay. So, I do this when I'm planning like vacations or trips or something. I will, I'll get really into it and I'll enjoy, finding the flight and anticipating what's going to happen. And then I also consider the fact that it may not happen, that maybe I won't get the visa, or maybe the flight will be canceled, or maybe, some pandemic will happen in the world, So you just learn to let go, even when you're in it, even when you're enjoying it, even when you're with it. Okay. And then practicing gratitude and contentment. And I really enjoy um, contentment. I actually am doing some studying on some values, so bringing more values into my life. The 16 guidelines. If you've done an earlier course, you know what I'm talking about. The 16 guidelines, and one of them is contentment. And I had an assignment that for the whole day I had to bring it into my life. This idea of contentment, and I spend a lot of time with gratitude. And so I actually have a lot of happiness because I feel, because I feel so much gratitude, but also being happy with the way things are, being content with my situation is, just this sense of peace that happens when I don't need to fix anything, that whatever comes into my life will be great, and if it goes out of my life, that's okay too, and that just things are fine the way they are. And I think you develop this too with mindfulness and being in the present moment. So just a couple more antidotes to attachment, and then we'll do some breakout groups in a few minutes after I go through this slide. So we're going to do like we did yesterday, but I'll talk about that in a minute. Okay. So other antidotes to attachment is thinking about the disadvantages. Okay. So you're getting a more balanced view. So sometimes when people have had lots of difficulty picking the wrong people in dating, they can be more aware of maybe some red flags, we call them, like maybe the person talks to their mother too much, or because, maybe, or maybe they don't, they don't want children. Maybe they're not the greatest person in the world for us because we really want children. So just considering the disadvantages. Again, it doesn't mean you reject the person. It doesn't mean you look only at the negative. You just start to have more of a balanced. Oh, I did that. Remembering the negative aspects of desirable people, objects, and situations. It can help you then when they don't come through. Thinking about the disadvantages, actually what I meant are the disadvantages of developing attachment, developing this obsessive desire. And then the last one is recognizing how our mind creates the experience of obsessive desire. How when we get a good feeling from something, and when you fall in love, it's very difficult because even physically, you start producing these hormones that oxytocin, I think it's called, that like these feel good chemicals that are part of the bonding experience, and mating, and not necessarily the ones related to sex and desire, but even this sense of euphoria and well-being when you fall in love. So it's very hard to see that although that experience is happening because of this connection, there are still going to be negative aspects of the person. And so trying to see those, even when you're in that process, can be very challenging. But it also makes for a lasting relationship, because if you go into a situation, like you go into a long-term commitment with your eyes wide open, then when those negative aspects appear, it's like, well, yeah, that's the person that I married. That's the person I promised to spend the rest of my life with. And they've always had these positive and negative aspects. And it actually promotes a lot more lasting relationship, because then when the relationship changes, you change with it. And you're happy to continue to renew your love with the person, no matter who they are and who they become. Okay. All right, so for the breakout groups, so if you weren't here yesterday, what we do is actually Zoom has this amazing function where you divide into, we can divide you into groups, and you talk to 2 other people. So we'll do, I think, 25 groups. So there will be either 3 or 4 people. And we'll have you talk for 10 minutes. And it's good to turn on your video if you can while you're doing this exercise. And please don't leave. I think it's really great to interact with others, and we had lots of really positive feedback about doing this. So the question that you're gonna answer while you're doing this, is what is the difference between love and attachment? Okay, from a Buddhist point of view, the way that I just explained it, what is the difference between love and attachment? So you'll have 10 minutes to discuss this. So, okay, whenever you want to do that, Felipe will send you into groups. And if you don't get into your groups, like if something technical happens, just come back to the main room, and Felipe will reassign you. Okay.
Okay, I'm starting it now.
Roshni, unmute yourself. I think you have to unmute everybody, Felipe. Oh, I can't. Felipe?
Hi.
Hi. Oh, good. Now you can do it.
Oh, okay. Are we the only two Venerable Drolma?
No, it looks like Kritika, but she's still muted. Kritika, can you unmute yourself? It's nice to see you again. I recognize you.
Thank you, Venerable Drolma. It's been so calming, really, your session.
Good.
Kritika?
So, there she is.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, we can hear you. We can't see you, though.
Can
Now
you
we
hear
can
me
see
now?
you.
Yes.
Yes.
Hi.
Hey, how are you?
Yeah, good. How are
Hi,
you?
I'm good. How are you, Drolma?
Good. Good.
It's so amazing to see you again. I was feeling so nostalgic about this thing. You were the first. So I've done like 5 retreats at the Shita, and you were the first one I did one with. And it's just so amazing to see you again.
Yeah, you too. You too. So what do you think? What's the difference between love and attachment?
So yeah, you want to go in first, Roshni?
Go ahead if you want to.
Oh, so the way I understand this is that love is when you want the other person to be happy, right? Even if they're not with you, wherever they are or whoever they are with, and there's no there's no grasping in it. As in, I want it for myself.
Mhm.
I just want whatever is the best for you. That's how
Mhm.
I understand it. And
Mhm.
attachment is when you want to achieve something, and you want to you grasp at it, that I I want it for myself. I want to achieve it. I want to I think, yeah, that's the drift. That is how I understand it.
Mhm.
Just
Mhm.
please correct me if I'm wrong, Drolma.
Oh, no, that's not the purpose. The purpose is to share our views. Yeah.
Right.
So, yeah, it sounds, yeah, I mean, it sounds good to me. Yeah, sometimes I feel like I can love I can love someone and still want something from them. But I guess that's still attachment. I mean, don't we have expectations from those that we love? And does that mean that we're attached to them, that we have obsessive? Can we have,
True.
I guess that's my question. Yeah. Go ahead,
So,
Roshni.
So I don't look at love and attachment as mutually exclusive. I believe that some amount of attachment does happen in love,
Mhm.
but the thing is, I'm a mother, and so I love my child, I love my daughter, but I wouldn't cling to her because so when she grows big, I'm not going to be clinging to her and making sure she's always with me. That's
Mhm.
attachment, and
Mm,
that
mm,
kills her. So
mm,
like Kritika said, it's to see that the other person is happy. That becomes love.
mm,
So when my child is ready to fly away, I let her go
mm,
because that's my love for her, to see her happy. Am I attached? Yes, I would still be attached to her. If something bad happens to her, um, for me, because I'm attached to her, I'm going to feel the pain too.
mm,
Unlike, so you had spoken about love and kindness to the to strangers, to people whom I've never seen.
Mm-hmm.
But that love and kindness is very different from the love one feels for one's loved ones,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
because that element of attachment comes with that love, maybe.
I guess I'd see it as, go ahead.
No, please go ahead,
Yeah. Oh,
Drolma.
I was thinking of that as compassion. When you don't want someone to suffer, I would see that as more compassion than attachment.
I kind of agree with Roshni, as in when she said that I think attachment does not exist, totally independently of love, at least in our, regular lives. When we, when we are with somebody, I think it's a mix of love and attachment that we have for them. And when it's very difficult to completely, distinct these two feelings, because it's natural to, when we love somebody, it's natural to get attached to them, have expectations in place, and have a certain kind of ownership on that person, or an entitlement to that person. So that is how jealousy and possessiveness and all of those things come in with attachment. So it takes a bit of conscious effort to keep checking yourself that if I love you, I do not want it to be contaminated with attachment. I want the best for you, and not necessarily want to grasp onto you with my senses, with my sensory pleasure. So just like how you understand the difference between pleasure and happiness, or suffering and pain, I think that is kind of the fine line between love and attachment too.
Yeah, I'd agree with Kritika.
Yeah, I have to think about that one. I think that's a neat parallel when you talk about pain and suffering. Pain is, the existence of this, sensory thing, and suffering is what we do with our minds to it. Yeah, I have one teacher who talked about karmic connections, that these relationships that we have karmic connections with people are different from like strangers, that we don't necessarily have a karmic connection with strangers. And so that element of karmic connection often maybe creates that attachment, because it's a more powerful, relationship. And there's probably, past memories or imprints that are influencing our relationship with that person, that make it more likely to be that we would have these expectations and these strings. And I wonder if we can, go ahead.
Sorry.
No.
It's just occurred to me that attachment can also be in a negative attachment, because to be fixated about somebody, but in an angry, in a negative way. I'm not the typical kind of attachment where you're clinging. I'm talking of focusing yourself and getting irritated and getting emotional about a person with whom you hate that person, but you're still fixated with that person. That's attachment too?
I would say so. I guess it depends. Well, it's anger, but if it depends what you're getting from it, right? What are you getting from the constant hatred and keeping it all alive in your mind? Yeah, if you're getting if you think that's a good thing, that you have to stay angry, then that could be attachment to the feeling of, getting revenge or something like that.
Yeah, I think I would agree with you, Roshni. I think the attachment could be positive, as in, you positively want to grasp onto the person, or you negatively want to grasp onto the person in the form of anger, for example, or, evil thoughts, evil wishes. But yeah, I think attachment is the opposite of indifference. So, yeah, that is how I look at it. I can be attached to the negative being of somebody instead of the well-being, for that matter.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
nice,
Thank
nice
you.
to see you again.
Good to see you.
Okay, welcome back. So I think we have time for some questions. If we wanted to do some questions before we go to the meditation, we can do that now. So if you have any questions, go ahead and type them in for Felipe.
We have a couple already. I'm going to start by unmuting Inderjit. You can now ask your question.
Yeah. Good morning, Drolma. Good morning.
Hello.
Hello. So really nice to attend this session every day. Really helping me a lot. So my question is, when I have entered into this meditation, this journey, I'll say. So I was at that point of time in my life where I actually wanted to achieve. I achieved, but that was not giving me the happiness which I was looking for. So I actually changed my, I looked for more. But now this is giving me some kind of satisfaction, happiness, being with myself. Lot of anxiety issues have reduced. But my point is that again, I'm developing some kind of attachment to this meditation, that I want this again and again, more and more of it, more of it.
Yeah. So we can get attached to like certain feelings of meditating, especially calm abiding. You know, when we start feeling the bliss and the peace and, you know, the clarity, we get attached to those. And that's when you really need to bring into your vipassana, your analytic meditation. So that not so that you don't enjoy those things, but that you see that it's actually for a purpose. It's to challenge the mind. And when you bring in your analytic meditation, for a time, those feelings of bliss will decrease. And you have to be comfortable with that. And even your ability to focus will decrease a bit, because the mind is now has more information to deal with when it's staying on a topic. So yes, you can get attached to meditation, but I wouldn't say stop doing it. I would say start to shift it and use it for its purpose to actually transform the mind.
Okay. Thank you so much. And one more question, very small question.
Sure.
I feel that when we say this attachment is a positive exaggeration, this also gives some kind of negative emotions also. Like eventually it leads to anger or some kind of anxiety, frustration. That also is, I feel that.
Yes. Yes, that's one of the disadvantages when we start to engage with a situation or a person in this way that thinks that they're the source of our happiness. That's the exaggeration of the positive. And yes, it's uncomfortable. It's like it's considered an afflictive emotion. So when we do that, we definitely experience negative results from that. Definitely. That's why we want to decrease it. Yeah. Sure.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, there's one question to read out. It says, in the course material downloaded, it says there are many meditation techniques, but according to the Tibetan tradition, all can be included in two types, stabilizing and analytical. So where does the third type come from? Is mindfulness part of stabilizing or analytical? Also, mindfulness is listed as in a chart as an antidote for the fault of forgetfulness.
Okay. So one definition, okay, let's answer the first question first. So mindfulness actually is a prerequisite to calm abiding. And I don't think that actually the material, that statement in the material, I wouldn't necessarily agree with, because I think there are more than just calm abiding and analytic. And then the other thing is that we're talking language and definitions. So I don't think you should get too hung up on this idea that there are only two types ever. You know, it depends how you divide them. You could divide them into two types and say that mindfulness comes under calm abiding because it's a prerequisite for calm abiding. Yeah, you could say that, but I don't know that the divisions are all that helpful. And then the second question is that, once again, we're talking definitions. So mindfulness, when we're talking about it as an antidote to forgetting, is actually more of a specific technical term. And again, it's a specific technical term that English doesn't necessarily have the language for. They call it mindfulness in both cases, but it doesn't mean the same thing. Mindfulness, although they're related, definitely. This antidote to forgetting is this sense when you're in your meditation and you're focusing on a certain object, will you use your mindfulness to be aware if you have lost your object or not. So tracking whether you are on, remembering that you're trying to meditate on the breath, and so then tracking when the breath is, when you're on the breath and when you're not. Okay, so what you can do, you bring in this power of mindfulness, which is like another aspect of your mind, that every so often while you're meditating, you're focusing on your breath, you check, am I on the breath? You ask yourself that. That's the mindfulness power. Am I on the breath? Am I on the object? And if you keep doing that, like every so often, like every, half a minute or something, am I on the breath? Am I on the breath? Then when you go off the breath, when you get distracted and you start thinking about something else, you have created the conditions for that to show up in your mind. Am I on the breath? And then you recognize you're not on the breath, so you bring yourself back. So you catch yourself earlier in your distraction of, getting pulled away. And that's why in the early stages of meditation, this power of mindfulness becomes very important. And when you get better at meditating, in particular this calm abiding, eventually you won't need that power of mindfulness, because you will already stay with the object automatically. You will have trained your mind to stay with the object automatically. So that's mindfulness used in two different ways.
We move on to Stephanie.
Last one. Yeah, last one.
Stefania, you can.
Hello.
Hi.
Hey, thank you. I'm excited. So my question was about the analytic meditation, whether I can do it with subjects of my life. So if I want to focus in certain things, I want to go deeper. How can I guide myself through that kind of subjects and that kind of meditation? Sometimes I find it hard to,
yes, you can do that, and the best way to do that is well, I think two different ways. One is that find the most specific question about your life that you're trying to answer, okay, and make it general. So like something like why should I do this action, right? Why should I stay living here? Like say you're thinking about moving or something. Why should I stay living here? Or why should I move? Like either one, okay, to this new place. So you find a question and then you ask it repeatedly. So you ask it and you have one answer, and then you ask it again and you have another answer, and you ask it again. You keep doing this, right? like maybe 10 or 15 times, because each time you ask that, you go deeper and you go deeper and you get more information and more aspects. Okay, so that's one way you can do it. The other way is if you come up with lots of different questions, okay, and you answer them and you think about them. Okay, so that's another way that you can do it. But I would write down your questions and then follow them in your meditation so that you stay on your topic. And then as you go deeper, either way, you will probably come to like a physical conclusion, right? And you bring in your heart here, you bring in your emotions here to what feels best, what feels most right. You can even imagine yourself doing whatever the choice you think is best, and then see how that feels. So you bring in your visualization. Imagine yourself living in the new place. Imagine, you know, what your surroundings would be like, and then get in touch with how that feels, you know, to have made that decision. So absolutely, you can use analytic meditation. And yeah, and then you come to a conclusion and you hold that, like, this makes sense. And then you're more committed to your decision when you go through that process.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Good, good. Okay, let's do some meditation.
Yep, let's go into analytic.
Good.
All right, so everyone, please set up your posture once again. Take a short moment to relax, to allow the posture especially to be grounded and stable, and to keep your back loosely straight. And let's start by allowing the bell to bring you into the body as usual. Taking a couple of minutes to go through the process of settling down the body in its natural state. As much as you can, letting go of any tension, any agitation, any worries or concerns in the mind, any tightness in the body. Just developing that sense of calmness. Relaxing, letting go. Setting the body at ease, letting it rest. Maintaining the mind awake and alert. Just take a minute to experience this state of calmness. Just be with the body as it is. And now gently letting go of observing the body, observing the physical sensations. We now go into the space of the mind, where thoughts and mental images arise. And in order to start this meditation on attachment, you can begin by bringing to mind different objects of attachment. It can be things, people, places. Just go through a mental list of things that you're attached to. And then let your mind go to one of those things, either thing, people, or place. One of these objects of attachment, which is perhaps the one you're most attached to, or that your mind goes to directly. And stay with that object. And check your emotional reaction to having the object of attachment present in front of you. Really try to get a sense of what it feels like to have your object of attachment present and how your mind reacts to that. And now try to identify the qualities or characteristics that you attribute to the object, that which attracts you to it. You can start by checking your senses. If you like this object because of how it looks, how it tastes, how it smells, and so forth. Or perhaps you like the object because of a mental attitude that it creates, makes you feel satisfied, fulfilled, makes you feel happy, gives you a nice feeling. So now having identified what is it exactly that you attach to in terms of this object, you can analyze and investigate whether these qualities are present within the object itself. But if that were true, shouldn't everyone who comes in touch with this object see those same qualities as well? Is that really the case? Check to see if your own perception, your ego, is involved in the process of attributing these qualities. And seeing how our own perception plays a role in this interaction, we can also acknowledge how we also impute on the object another characteristic, which is that of permanence. So really check if you have a sense that this person, thing, or place will always be there to satisfy your needs and give you a constant happiness. Intellectually, you might say no, but check to see that there's something deeper. And ask yourself, is it even possible that this thing is always there to satisfy me? In order to counteract this view that the object is permanent, you can bring in an awareness of impermanence, acknowledging how this object is changing moment by moment. Noticing how, just like everything in the universe, this object will change and eventually dissolve. Ask yourself, can this really bring me everlasting happiness? What is there to cling to? And now to check the impact and the actual feeling that attachment creates in your mind. Imagine that you bring the object very close to you. This thing, person, or place, you hold it very, very tightly. You can even have a sense that there are others around you trying to pull it away from you. So once again, notice what happens to your mind at that moment. Do you cling harder and grasp at the object with more energy. Does this seem like something you can sustain for a long time? How does it feel to be clinging desperately like this? Is your mind calm and stable at that very moment? Now gently open up your arms, let go of the object, and still the object remains there. Take a step back, and then another one. And once you have created a distance between yourself and your object of attachment, allow it to stay, and even see if you can enjoy its presence. And now check, how does your mind feel? Is this different from the previous experience? Do you now feel calmer and more relaxed as you release your grip on the object? Finally, you can allow the object to dissolve slowly and gently. Or you can even imagine that you offer it to someone who really needs it. Simply let it go. And you can conclude with the thought that the mind of attachment creates problems for ourselves and for others. But we can definitely choose to relate to things in a lighter way. That there is no need for this quality of grasping and clinging. And that we can enjoy things without attachment. Slowly and gently coming out of the meditation. So before we go into the dedication, there's one story that I always like to tell when we do this meditation on attachment. I think it really brings it to the point. It's this story about a king who had this massive state and a palace, and he was very, very wealthy. But he was actually very interested in spiritual teachings, and so he had this teacher who was kind of like a sadhu, this wandering yogi who had nothing. He wore a long loincloth, and his only two possessions in the world were a wooden staff and a wooden bowl. That was everything that he owned. And so one day the sadhu and the king are out in the palace gardens, which is more like a huge forest, and the sadhu is teaching, giving the king some spiritual teachings. And all of a sudden, one of the guards comes rushing in and he goes, Your Majesty, the palace is burning, you must come quickly. And the king looks at the guard and he says, Go away, don't you see I'm receiving spiritual teachings right now? It's not time. And the guard says, But Your Majesty, absolutely everything is burning, there will be nothing left. The king looks at him and he says, Go away, go away. And then all of a sudden the sadhu gets up and what do you mean go away? My bowl and my stuff are in there. So it really comes to show that you can have a lot of things and not be attached to them, not have that grasp in mind, or you can have very little but be very attached to it. So it's not really about the objects, it's more about the mind that relates to them. So I think that's a very beautiful teaching in itself. So, okay, let's move on to the dedication. And this time I'll share my screen so that everyone can see the text. Yeah. Okay. May all beings everywhere, led by suffering of body and mind, obtain an ocean of happiness and joy by virtue of my merits. May no living creature suffer, commit evil, or ever fall ill. May no one be afraid or belittled with a mind weighed down by depression. May the blind see forms and the deaf hear sounds. May those whose bodies are worn with toil be restored and finding repose. May the naked find clothing, the hungry find food. May the thirsty find water and delicious drinks. May the poor find wealth, those weak with sorrow find joy. May the forlorn find happiness, find hope, constant happiness and prosperity. May there be timely rains and bountiful harvests. May all medicines be effective and wholesome prayers bear fruit. May all who are sick and ill quickly be free from their ailments. Whatever diseases are in the world, may they never occur again. May the frightened cease to be afraid, and those bound be freed. May the powerless find power, and may people think of benefiting each other. For as long as space remains, for as long as sentient beings remain, until then, may I too remain, to dispel the mysteries. Okay.
Okay, thank you, everybody. And just a quick announcement. Tomorrow, after this session, we'll take like a 5-minute break, and then we'll have another hour of Q&A. So tomorrow, if you wanted to stay after we'll do our usual hour-and-a-half class, and then we'll take 5 minutes, and then we'll do another hour of just for your questions. And your questions can be about anything related to Buddhism. They don't have to be specific to what we've learned in this course. So it's wide open. Okay, so thank you, and I will see you tomorrow.
Thank you. Thank you, Venerable.
Bye.
Bye.